Welcome, everybody. I thought, Christina, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Christina. I am a third-year student here at CU Denver in the English department, specifically creative writing track, and it's going to be real nice to be here. I hope you guys enjoy Sarah's presentation.
Thanks. Thanks for moderating the chat today. So, Christina, I'll keep an eye on the chat.
Will do.
And my name is Sarah Tyson. I am a professor in the philosophy department. And I wanted to welcome you to CU Denver. We're really excited to have you here. And I also wanted to say good job on showing up to this. I think what you'll find to be true, what I've found to be true in my long college career, is that showing up is like half the battle. Like, things happen for you if you show up. So I wanted to say that this is a great way to start off your CU Denver career, to come to an event like this. And also, the other thing I wanted to say is that one of the main keys to student success is to build relationships at the university. And I know that's a really difficult thing to do right now in these remote times, but coming to things like this, meeting people like Christina, who I think has a depth of knowledge about what it means to be a student at CU Denver. You now know her name and could reach out to her. You know me, you can reach out to me. So making relationships through these kinds of events, I think, is really important, and will be important to your success. Oh, and it looks like we have somebody else joining. Cool.
Yeah, Jamie Carrington is popping in to say hello.
Excellent. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah.
Thanks for dropping by.
Do you want to introduce yourself, Jamie?
Hold on.
Give yourself a minute.
There you are. Out of the light, you emerge.
I've just sit at my dining room table, so I can just have to climb into the seats at the high top. So but yeah, so again, hi, my name is Jamie. I work in the CLAS Dean's office. I am the program director for admissions, retention, and student success. I also work in the Office of Inclusive Excellence in STEM. So if you have any questions pretty much about anything, feel free to reach out and ask.
Excellent. Well, Jamie, will you vet a fact I just gave them, which is that one of the key factors in student success is that they build relationships with people at the university?
Yes.
Okay.
That is probably, if not the most important factor.
It's up there, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, so thanks so much for stopping by. So now you have the three of us that you at least know we know you a little bit, right? We've seen your name in a Zoom meeting, so you can reach out to us. Was there any other information, Jamie, that you wanted to make sure?
Oh, I'm just here to help.
Cool. Excellent. Well, so I said I was a professor of philosophy. I've been at CU Denver for 8 years. So I think between Christina, Jamie, and I, we can probably answer questions you have unrelated to the presentation. So we'll leave some time for that after I do a little presentation on anti-racism. There's a lot of collective knowledge here. But yeah, I am an associate professor, which means that I have tenure, and tenure means that the university basically can't fire me unless I do something unethical. And so you'll be taught by folks who have that kind of position, people who are here more like on a class-by-class basis, those kinds of things. So I invite you to call me Sarah. Your professors will have different ideas about what they want you to call them, but one thing you can always call the person teaching your class is professor. That's like a really safe way. Dear professor, hey professor, I have a question. So that might be different from where you're coming from. You might be coming from community college and then it's the same, but if you're coming out of high school, then professor is a safe one, but please do feel free to call me Sarah. And I just wanted to acknowledge up front before I dive into the presentation, these are super weird times. I know you know that, but we also know that on the teaching side and on the administrative side and on the student support side. And people are being really innovative and thoughtful and creative. And part of what makes that possible, part of what makes it possible for us to do that is because we get really good student feedback. So I encourage you to give feedback. And if something's not working for you, to seek help with it. And if you don't know who to talk to, then reach out to the people you're meeting in these kinds of events, reach out to TAs, reach out to professors, reach out to whomever seems like somebody you feel like you can approach. So I'm going to start my presentation here in a second. I'm just going to encourage you to ask questions along the way if they pop up. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions in the presentation because I'm a philosopher, and that's my basic job description is to ask questions. And you're here talking about anti-racism. So this is obviously a big topic. It's a difficult topic. And I'll set some ground rules up when I dive into the presentation. But I also just wanted to say thanks so much for showing up for talking about something that's like very difficult and very important. So I'm going to screen share a PowerPoint. I'm going to set this to go. So this should be the title of the session you signed up for, Anti-Racism, a Philosophical Approach. So I've studied critical race theory for over a decade. I still consider myself a student of it. I learn something new every day. But I wanted you to know that that's kind of the lens that I come at this from. Critical race theory is something that's developed in philosophy to think about race, to think about racism, and to think about anti-racism. So to think about what race is, how it was invented. It was invented in the 16th to 18th centuries is really when modern racism got invented. Racism was pretty much invented at the same time. So race and racism have a really tightly related history. And critical race theory looks at that history with the interest in undoing racism. So we'll get into all that, but just that's a little preliminary about where I'm coming from and how. All right, so here are just some preliminaries. Now, if we were in a class together, if we had more than the time for this session, we would generate these together. But I thought I would throw them up there for us today since we have less time. So the obvious, we're coming from different perspectives and we're drawing from different experiences and knowledges, but it's helpful to say that up front, right? To know that that's true. This is a difficult topic to discuss. So again, I really appreciate you being here for it. And all of us may sometimes feel uncomfortable or experience strong emotions. So you may experience strong emotions also as uncomfortable. And that's okay. Like being uncomfortable is okay. We will speak respectfully with one another. So disrespect, not okay. Discomfort, okay. Is a rule, an easy rule to remember. So some of the ways that we can practice speaking respectfully to one another is that, let's say you're like really mad about something. I feel really mad when, for instance. I saw it, did a comment just come up?
No, I was just letting people know that if any questions do come up, you can go ahead and ask them in the Zoom chat, and I'll redirect Sarah's attention to them as necessary.
Perfect. Yeah, it can be much easier to ask in chat than it is to like try to stop the stream of words. So I statements, I feel angry because I hear this in that statement, for instance. And we'll offer each other reasons because philosophers ask questions and give reasons. Those are kind of the two things we do, and we can talk about what a reason is, but we'll give each other reasons. I'm the moderator, that's my responsibility. So if respect breaks down, I'm gonna just pause the whole thing. I don't anticipate that, but just so you know, that's my job. I am responsible for the tenor of the conversation. And so rely on me for that, and I will show up for that. And then we're gonna learn today is my hope. And it would be super cool if all of us learned something, including me. But that's like my top priority is this learning. So as a philosopher, when they asked me to do this, I was like, you know, like, what's the question that I could frame that would maybe be most helpful? And it was, what is anti-racism, right? We have this concept, anti-racism, and what does it mean? And one thing we can do is look at the prefix anti. And we've seen it some other places before. I was trying to think of words that might be rattling in your head right now. And I thought antiviral, antimicrobial, antibacterial, right? All these things that we're now using, these hand sanitizers that have these anti properties. And we know that it means not, right? But it doesn't just, when you use an antiviral, it's not just not a virus, right? Everything that's not a virus is not a virus. An anti doesn't mean just not a virus. It means specifically something that fights a virus, right? If you got a hand sanitizer that just wasn't a virus, that's not super helpful, right? You put some mud on your hands, that might stop you from touching your face, right? But that's not going to do anything to the virus. So anti means something more than just not racism or not racist, right? It means something more active than that. It means something that fights racism. And so we already know a lot just from studying the prefix, that Latin prefix, anti. So, but then it's like, okay, that was the easy part. The harder part is, what does racism mean? And so you can think of places you've seen it before. Maybe you've seen it on Twitter. Maybe you've seen it on Instagram. Maybe you've seen it on TV. Nobody watches TV. Maybe you've seen it on a show you watch. Maybe you've seen it in the newspaper, right? Like maybe you're watching protests. Maybe you've been to a protest, right? People are using the word racism all over. So it has a lot of meanings. And our job as philosophers is to think about that proliferation, right? That this concept has all of these meanings attached to it. It's been proliferated, meaning it's gotten a lot of things attached to it. So we have to kind of survey the field, like what are all the meanings attached to it? And are some of them better than others? Do some of them do more work explaining the world than others? And so one way we could attack this question or tackle it is to ask, what does racism have to do with race? Because at the root of the word racism is this word race. And so I'm gonna make a dodge to a video. I thought you might enjoy watching a video. This has the virtue of being a documentary that's available on Netflix. It's a PBS documentary that's well regarded, that it was made in 2014 and it already looks really dated, but it's representing views in science that are still current. But so it's called Race, the Power of an Illusion, and I recommend it to you. Like if you're passionate about these topics, I think it's an important documentary to have kind of behind you. But I'm gonna switch over now, and it's just a 5-minute clip from that documentary. So, new share. All right. So we'll watch this and then we'll check back in.
There is no question that individual human beings are different, one from the other. Our eyes confirm this day in and day out. Skin color, body shape, hair form, eye shape. For several hundred years, we have used these visual differences to classify people into 4 or 5 groups we call races.
We have a notion of race as being divisions among people that are deep, that are essential, that are somehow biological or even genetic, and that are unchanging, that these are clear-cut, distinct categories of people.
And the beauty of the race business is that you can identify people by just looking at them. You don't even have to look at their genes, because one manifestation of their genes is there, namely skin color or eye shape or hair shape. And then that's the key to everything.
The idea of race assumes that simple external differences, rooted in biology, are linked to other, more complex internal differences, like athletic ability, musical aptitude, intelligence. This belief is based on the idea that race is biologically real.
All of our genetics now is telling us that that's not the case. We can't find any genetic markers that are in everybody of a particular race and in nobody of some other race. we can't find any genetic markers that define race.
And actually, what we're going to generate are billions of copies of a little section of your genetic code. And we're going to look
These students are gathering for a DNA workshop led by Cold Spring Harbor Labs teacher Scott Bronson.
Pipette up 30 microliters, fill it.
Marcus, Gorgeous, Jackie, Noah, Hannah, Jamil, and their fellow students are about to explore the biology of human variation.
But there's another type of DNA. Does anybody know what that type of DNA is? Yeah.
Mitochondrial?
Mitochondrial DNA. Very good.
They will compare their skin colors.
They're like not human colors.
They will type their blood. And they will swab cells from inside their mouths to extract a small portion of their own DNA. Once the sample is ready, they will compare some of their genetic similarities and differences.
Look at a very tiny section of this ring. We're just going to look at
The students begin the workshop with the same assumptions most of us have.
As you begin to look at the data, you might want to keep in your mind who you think you might be most similar to and who you think you might be most different to.
I think I probably have the most similarities with Mr. Bronson or with Carol because we were white males, both Carol and I and both Scott Bronson and I.
I think I'd have the most differences with Carol and the most similarities with Gorgeous.
She's African American, I'm African American. I mean, like, black.
I think maybe me and Natalia are most alike. She's Latin American and I'm Latin American. I figured that there would be tons of differences, especially with people who looked so different.
To understand why the idea of race is a biological myth requires a major paradigm shift, an absolute paradigm shift, a shift in perspective. And for me, it's like seeing, what it must have been like to understand that the world isn't flat. And perhaps I can invite you to a mountaintop and you can look out the window and at the horizon and see, oh, what I thought was flat, I can see a curve in now, that the world is much more complicated. In fact, that race is not based on biology, but race is rather an idea that we ascribe to biology.
All right. So, go back to my PowerPoint here. So the question I want you to start thinking about is, what claim or claims was the clip making, right? What is the clip that we just watched? What is it telling us about race? And I've just grabbed a few ideas, but if you have more you want to throw on here, go for it. The first is that race is powerful, right? It's a powerful idea about the fact that people are different and that this is a difference we can see visually in our physical features. And the documentary communicates that in a few ways. It says it explicitly. It also shows it, right? So it shows a lot of different people. It shows documents from the development of scientific racism in the 19th century. So the three boys who were put next to each other, that's a document from the 19th century when the science of race was being, the pseudoscience really of race was being developed, right? And it also shows it to us visually through that chess game, right? The like black and white pieces. So the documentary is showing us in a number of ways, as well as telling us that race is powerful, people are different. This is about our visual field. This is about how we take in people that we see through their physical differences. And it's also making a claim that looks sort of contradictory to that, which is that it's illusionary or made up or not real. And it's basing those claims on two related but distinct ideas: that race isn't genetic and that it's not biological, right? And in fact, that last statement in that clip is race is an idea ascribed to biology. So in other words, race is an idea that people say has to do with people's biological makeup, with a sort of life force that they have, that race arises from that. And what the scientists and the anthropologists there were saying is this is not true, right? That race does not map onto either genetics or biological difference. And so there's a way in which race is both powerful and illusionary. And so how does it work, right? How is it generating this power if it's not, in fact, genetic or biological? And so I think this gives us actually some clues about what racism might be, insofar as we now know it's about bodies, right? It's about how bodies get seen, and it's how they get grouped. So one of the things that's interesting about the kids in the classroom, the students in the classroom, is they have these thoughts about, I'll be most like the people who I look like, right? I'll be most genetically like the people I'm most visually like. And the spoiler alert, but when they actually do the genetic analysis, there's no difference between them. There's no way to distinguish racial groups by the genetic analysis that they do. But they have these ideas that they're somehow members of these groups because they visually look alike or they visually look different. And the thing we also haven't really gotten to in that clip, but that the documentary gets into in quite really interesting ways, I think, is that those groups have been put on hierarchies. And so you'll sometimes hear people talk about white supremacy as synonymous with racism. And what the word supremacy is signaling there, right, is a claim to sort of being on top of a hierarchy, right? The claim to supremacy. And so there's a lot of research into the history of how those hierarchies got built. So for instance, in the United States, the first time we really see the colonies create a law about race is in Virginia. And the work that first law, it's in like the 1640s, I think. I'd have to double check the date, but it's around the 1640s. So the first people who were kidnapped in Africa and brought and forced to labor for free in the Virginia colony was 1619. And that's the first time slaves, in other words, are brought to the colonies. But in the 1640s, we start seeing the Virginia colonies start creating laws that create a hierarchy, that white people are on top. And then interestingly, then there's two other racial groups that get put somewhere below white folks. And this is people of African descent and then people who are indigenous to the Americas, right? Because in the colonies, there's always racial plurality in the colonies. And I think the one we most think about often is European settlers then enslaving people. But then we have this other very early dynamic of the people whose land the settlers were taking, usually through genocidal practice. And then not long into all of this, we have then people being brought from Asia to fill laboring roles, both in the Caribbean and also on the West Coast. Okay, so you can see that I'm kind of a nerd about all this. I love this history and thinking about it and how to address it and how to undo it. There's a lot there. But the thing I want you to think about are bodies getting grouped into things called races, and then the way these hierarchies get built historically, and what that all means for now. And so our target here is anti-racism. So is anti-racism then, the question we could ask, is it about fighting race or is it about fighting racism? And one of the reasons I want to ask you that question or put that question in your mind is because a lot of people think the way to deal with racism is to be colorblind, right? To not see or think about race. And this is an interesting idea. It developed in the 70s, and it has a literature. It's been developed through many different modes. There are people who theorize it. There are people who have popularized it through novels, through political policy, through all these things. It's interesting though, because race is about difference, right? Racism is about hierarchy. And so is the problem that we need to attack difference? Or is it hierarchy? Or is it some combination? What is interesting about colorblind theories or colorblind approaches to racism is that it wants to dismiss difference at the same time that it's trying to dismiss hierarchy. And one of the things I will ask you then is, you know, is race important to your self-identity? And this is just something you can kind of think about. And one of the reasons I think that's difficult for colorblind policy to work is that people actually self-identify racially in quite deep and meaningful ways. And to ask people to give that up, I think has a lot packed into it that we need to think through. So you can see already, like, kind of theoretically where I'm at, where I think the target's got to be racism and not race. But this is open for discussion, and I'm happy to give resources on thinking through all of these issues. But I wanted to put this, I think a lot of the times there's an impulse to think that the problem is race, or talking about race, or identifying as a race, or seeing other people's race. And I want to just begin to introduce the idea that we could separate race and racism in ways that might be meaningfully anti-racist. Okay. And then just, this is my last slide, and these are some ideas I have about where to go from here. I'll open it up to discussion, but here are some questions that I hope will stay in your mind. At some point in your career, maybe you could even pursue them in a class. Do I need to learn more about race? Do I need to learn more about racism? Do I need to learn more about anti-racism? Why or why not? And so one of the things philosophy does is just make these kinds of questions really forward in your mind. It makes you think about them consciously, and then give yourself reasons, right? Like, why might I need to learn more about race? What are those reasons? Where can I learn more about race? So I'm going to promote classes. I think we have a lot of really great classes that are about race, that are about racism, that are about anti-racism. So I'm going to promote that. But as you know, probably from living through the last few months, there are a ton of resources just out in the world. And, you know, there are great books, there are blogs, there are videos, there are documentaries, right? I think Race, The Power of an Illusion is a really cool starting point for thinking about race, racism, and anti-racism. And then this final step that you might not expect from a philosopher, because philosophers are often seen as people who just think about things and don't do anything, is how will my increased understanding inform what I do? In other words, what will you do based on these things that you learn? And this is where I think we have a really interesting university, in that a lot of your professors are people who are doing things. They're activists, they're involved in policy, they're involved in shaping the university to do better, right? They're involved in all kinds of ways. And Jamie's involved in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. I've never remembered the new name. I feel like it's the new name. But the office, right, it's working all over this campus to do things to make the campus better. And so this question about how not just to understand the world, but how to change it.